Hey, what's up? Welcome to Champagne Sharks Podcast. This is T. You can find me on Twitter at Ricky Rawls. That's RICKYRAWLS. No underscore. This is episode 003, titled Why I Hate Hamilton, as in the musical. So let's get to it. All right. Before we get started, just want to get a few things out of the way. Starting June 1st, there's going to be weekly premium episodes that you'll only get as a paid subscriber. So that means 2 episodes a week. One free, the other only for paid subscribers. It's $5 a month, so if you don't pay, you get 4 episodes a month. If you do pay, you get 8 or more episodes a month. So try to sign up as a subscriber. To get premium episodes, go to patreon.com/Champagne Sharks. No underscore, one word. So patreon.com/Champagne Sharks, no underscores, one word. Sign up, fam. Okay, so this is also hopefully the last solo episode for a while. I'm gonna bring in co-hosts and guests. This episode is a little dense. You might want to listen to it more than once. In fact, I'd recommend it. It's also extra long, but since I missed last week, just consider it like a bonus. Just consider it double length. So anyway, today's topic is why I hate the musical Hamilton. I wanted to do a one-stop exhaustive list where I could lay out every reason why I don't like it, so I wouldn't feel the need to keep bringing it up on Twitter or answer people's questions when they ask why. So from now on, instead of explaining myself repeatedly, if someone ever asks me again why I dislike Hamilton the musical, I'll just point them to this episode and call it a day. First things first, I don't want to make it sound like I personally dislike this Lin-Manuel Miranda guy as a human being. He seems really nice. He seems totally misguided in a lot of ways, and I think spreads some terrible narratives in politics, especially for people of color, but I don't think he's especially malicious. He's got a puppy dog earnestness to him that I can see being infectious. He's got a kind of theater kid earnestness. I mean, more power to him. Another thing I won't dwell on is the quality of the rap songs and dancing. Musical taste is very subjective after all. I think the rap in Hamilton is terrible and sounds like a nerdcore version of Eminem's Lose Yourself. More like that than real authentic black hip-hop, but if someone finds it to be good, that's their taste, especially if you're a white person, not from the culture of hip-hop. I don't expect you to know better. And I can even understand why you like watered-down nerdy rap as an entry point into real hip-hop, kind of like how I understand how people who hate real jazz try Kenny G and Spyro Gyra and think, oh, wow, I'm a jazz aficionado now. I mean, I don't agree with it, but I kind of get it. I do question, however, if you're a black person who presents yourself as in touch with black hip-hop culture and you're talking about rocking out to the Hamilton soundtrack. I mean, come on, B. I'm side-eyeing you. You can't think this is good rap.
Yo, what time is it? Showtime!
Like I said,
Showtime, yo, I'm John playing on 3. Those redcoats don't want it with me, cause I will pop, chicka, plop these cops till I'm free.
Eh oui, oui, mon ami, je m'appelle Lafayette, the Lancelot of the revolutionary set.
Oh my God,
I came
so
from
bad.
afar just to say bonsoir to the king, cause c'est toi who is the best, c'est moi.
Bra, bra, I am Hercules Mulligan,
Oh,
up
God.
in it, loving it. Yes, I heard your mother said, come again. Lock up your daughters and horses.
Yo,
Of course,
is he
it's
talking about
hard to
having
have
sex
intercourse over four
with
sets of
horses? Like, what is
corsets.
this from?
No more sex, pour me another brew, son.
Yo.
Let's raise a couple more to the...
Oh, yeah, I couldn't do it anymore. But anyway, my primary focus today is to talk about who the musical is really for and how non-white people who are buying into Hamilton as being for them really shouldn't. Especially those who think of themselves as anti-racist or who believe in the idea that Black Lives Matter. Hamilton's message is the polar opposite of Black Lives Mattering in every way. That's the case I'm going to be laying out over the course of this episode. Its message, Hamilton's message, is that Black Lives Matter only to the degree they can celebrate white lives. Black lives matter only so far as black bodies, including the vocal cords, can be used as a vessel through which to channel white voices in a more appealing, more physical, more sexual, more empathetic way. That black lives only matter, that they're only achieving their full potential when they're being used to celebrate and continue the glory and traditions of white lives, which was the message of the movie Get Out. Like white people inhabited and colonized non-white bodies to get what they perceived as being the best of both worlds. Like the old white people in the movie Get Out are literally dying. The great white men of history are figuratively dying in pop culture and in the academy and in the history books. However, by getting to inhabit and colonize black bodies, in this case on a stage, having black people play the quote-unquote great white men using a bastardized version of their own culture, white people get to keep these great white men as immortal as ever, or at the very least extend their shelf life some. I'm going to deliberately repeat that. The real-life dynamic behind Hamilton the musical is the same dynamic that was made literal in Get Out. Combining white minds and ideas, white intellect, white determination, combining that with black people's bodies, their sexiness, their authenticity, their emotional souls, their voices, their ability to connect with people emotionally, combining those stereotypical white abilities with those stereotypical black natural gifts in a way to, first, ensure that white greatness gets to live forever, and second, to give black people the opportunity to be part of something greater than having to just be black. When Chris, the black guy, is in the chair in Get Out, and the video of the grandfather comes on, if you remember that scene, that video they show Chris when he's strapped, with the grandfather revealing the process they developed that puts white people in black bodies, I think a lot of it applies to what's happening here.
Hi, I'm Roman Armitage, and if you're watching this, you're probably wondering what's going on. There's no need to worry. Let's take a walk. You have been chosen because of the physical advantages you've enjoyed your entire lifetime. With your natural gifts and our determination, we could both be part of something greater, something perfect. My family and I are honored to offer it as a service to members of our group. Don't waste your strength. Don't try to fight it. You can't stop the inevitable. And who knows? Maybe one day you'll enjoy being members of the family.
So let's unpack some of that. Okay. You have been chosen because of the physical advantages you've enjoyed your entire lifetime. He says physical advantages, but let's not limit it to just sports or athletics. Include singing, dancing, being able to recognize and express emotion, a connection to nature, insight into the world of real suffering. These are part of what's considered our natural gifts also. Because they don't really think of us as working hard for them. They think of it almost as genetic a lot of the times, or innate. He continues, with your natural gifts and our determination, we could both be part of something greater, something perfect. This is a theme that was also touched on earlier in the movie when the father, played by Bradley Whitford, asks Chris, "What is your purpose?" and talks about immortality. Black people aren't deemed to have a truly worthwhile purpose unless white people give them one, or at least approve of the one they've chosen. And it's usually going to be one that enhances white people's lives, entertainment, or pockets. The grandfather on the video echoes this sentiment. Using your gifts to express yourself and your inner world is useless. You're black. How much of an inner world can you really have? How many great ideas? At least compared to a white person. Like, seriously? You have no self really worth expressing. But if you use your gifts to express our white selves instead, that perfect marriage of white ideas, white intellect, white values, mixed with your gifts, the end result would be perfect. This is the same bargain Hamilton offers, but with history. And just to make it clear, I'm not saying, before anybody says this, I'm not saying that Jordan Peele, in making Get Out, was doing a commentary on Hamilton or had it in mind. I'm just saying that the story in Get Out, those psychodynamics are as old as time. And you can see them in a lot of things. And that's why it makes sense you would see it again in Hamilton. So please don't say that I'm making a reach and saying that Jordan Peele made Get Out to be a commentary on Hamilton. I'm not saying that. Anyway, this is the same bargain that Hamilton offers, but with history. As a black person, you have no great history of your own to celebrate. No great ideas from your ancestral figures worth giving voice to and keeping alive. What historical purpose did black people have? Why waste your natural gifts celebrating your non-history when instead, with your natural gifts and our grit and determination, with our historical stories about our determination? Because remember, grit and determination of white people is a big recurring theme in Hamilton. We, meaning both races, could become part of something greater, and in the end, the result will be perfect. But just like in Get Out, it's a bargain that helps white people more, that effectively kills the black part of the equation and renders it little more than a passenger, despite maintaining a black exterior and black optics. And that effectively ensures that the previously dying white part of the equation gets an extended life, if not a rebirth. Then one of the last things the grandfather says is, "My family is honored to offer it as a service to members of our group. Don't waste your strength. Don't try to fight it. You can't stop the inevitable. And who knows, maybe one day you'll enjoy being members of the family." That's a key passage. It's being offered to members of quote unquote our group. Who is our group here? Privileged white elites. The ones who feel they're dying off, or at least their story's dying. In this case, in the case of the movie, literally, but in a metaphorical sense, whites, in terms of their supremacy, prestige, and privilege, feel like they're dying off. Just like the process offered in Get Out is offered to dying white people, the cultural appropriation process represented by Hamilton is being offered to a form of white history that itself was on its deathbed, known as founder's chic. Like in Get Out, the service is being offered to a group of white elites, most of whom, at least superficially, are liberal. For the purposes of this podcast, I'm going to call these type of modern white liberals West Wing liberals, or Sorkin liberals, after the show West Wing created by Aaron Sorkin. And I don't think this is a big reach because the father is played by Bradley Whitford, who is far and away best known for playing Josh on The West Wing. I think Jordan Peele, the director of Get Out, did this casting choice very deliberately as a form of commentary. The casting wasn't accidental based on how many other little touches are intentional in the movie. The West Wing is the perfect embodiment of the modern mainstream white liberal. And Bradley Whitford and the character he played, Josh, is the ultimate West Wing character. I'm going to a West Wing discussion when I'm supposed to be discussing why I hate Hamilton, because I want to make clear the musical is more an ode to the West Wing and its creator, Aaron Sorkin, in general than it is to hip hop. And it's more aimed at West Wing white liberals than it is at people of color. Just like the process described in Get Out is really for the benefit of the West Wing liberals in the movie. One of whom is, in the form of Bradley Whitford, the actor, is literally a West Wing liberal. And the black people's needs and concerns in the movie are far less of a concern. Lin-Manuel Miranda is on record in numerous places as being a huge West Wing fan, as well as being a fan of all things Sorkin, including his later show, The Newsroom, which is pretty awful. And if you love that unapologetically, you're as big a Sorkinite as there can be, because I can at least enjoy The West Wing as a guilty pleasure. The Newsroom is a chore. I mean, he tweeted his admiration for The Newsroom several times while it was on. Something else, West Wing liberals, more importantly, are neoliberals. So you'll see me using the term West Wing liberal and the term neoliberal pretty interchangeably. A West Wing liberal is basically a neoliberal who's extra smug and condescending and delusionally convinced of their moral superiority and big heart. This is a really simplified definition, but neoliberalism is the idea that society is best improved by asserting the importance of accumulating capital and promoting marketplace solutions to everything. Even personal development is seen through the lens of marketplace solutions, where you treat yourself like a business. This is the mindset of where people start talking about their quote-unquote personal brands or likening themselves to both a product and to the business selling that product. Like, think of Jay-Z's famous line, "I'm not a businessman, I'm a business man." That's neoliberalism in a nutshell. Like, 4 key aspects of neoliberalism are economic deregulation, removal of the welfare state and other government-based collective solutions, hyper-competitive self-interest, and the cultural trope of individual responsibility and pulling oneself up by one's bootstraps. Like, this isn't everything that makes neoliberalism, but these are key aspects of it that show up repeatedly in the messaging of Hamilton the musical. To learn more on neoliberalism, I recommend starting with an article from The Guardian by George Monbiot titled "Neoliberalism, the ideology at the root of all our problems." And I'm going to have everything I mentioned in this in the show notes. So just look at the show notes to the episode. You'll see everything. And I'm making a site, champagnesharks.com. It's not up yet, but it will be soon. And I'll have show notes to every episode on that. So don't kill yourself trying to write everything down. Anyway, I repeat, Hamilton is not a love letter to people of color, hip hop, women. It's a love letter to West Wing liberals, the idea of great white men. It's a love letter to neoliberals, including the so-called sane conservatives they fetishize as being well-intentioned, sane, and dedicated to productive discourse. Like, West Wing liberals have this idea of the quote-unquote good Republican. So Hamilton is just disguised as a love letter to people of color and women, because by doing that, it allows neoliberals both on the right and left to enjoy it openly and guilt-free, right in the midst of the same type of black people who usually love to protest black erasure and the lionization and centering of problematic elite white men. It's such a good disguise that it can even succeed in making those same diversity-obsessed, representation matter, social justice type of people of color think it's actually for them and their self-esteem to celebrate their contributions when it's totally not. In a New York Magazine article describing 20 things Lin-Manuel Miranda said influenced Hamilton, only 3 books appear, 3 nonfiction books, and they're all founder chic books. For those who don't know what founders chic means, it's a trend in telling history, and the most recently it appeared in the late 90s, early 2000s in a series of popular books that were all bestsellers, but it's a historical trend of lionizing American founders and America's founding as being far less problematic and more heroic and just and fair than they actually were, all the while downplaying the contributions from and mistreatments of non-whites, women, and the poor. So, in this article of 20 influences, Miranda also lists some rap influences, and it's totally obvious and uninspired cool dad type of rap that white and black liberals swoon at Obama for name checking in his totally lame Spotify playlist, the ones that he makes to get, cool cred. Like, it's really, really obvious dated choices, like Biggie Smalls, Big Pun, Jay-Z's Blueprint, Eminem's 8 Mile movie. Like, this is the type of rap that would totally fit in a white soccer mom's CD collection as she's driving around her kids in her minivan. Like, there's no real deep cuts here. Nothing a typical white liberal or a moderately hip red state white person wouldn't know and even listen to. Like how deeply steeped in hip hop is Miranda really? It's edgy hip hop as envisioned by Squares. Like, this stuff would be impressive to name drop 10 to 20 years ago maybe. In another article, Miranda says that after reading Ron Chernow's Founder Chic book about Hamilton, his takeaway was, quote, Hamilton also reminded me of Tupac Shakur, the West Coast rapper who was shot to death in 1996, end quote. Like, disregarding how utterly insane that comparison is, like, note how he can never go beyond the most obvious, well-known, and uncontroversial hip-hop references. Note how he took the time to explain who Tupac was and how he died in that quote. No hip-hop fan would need that explained. But they're never the real audience, just a bonus audience as an afterthought. This is always directed toward the white gaze, gaze being Gaze. In another article, the following is written among other things, and listen to how neoliberal it sounds. While reading Ron Chernow's exhaustive 2004 Hamilton biography, Mr. Miranda was struck by the parallels between Hamilton, an illegitimate immigrant from the West Indies who rose to power largely by the sheer force of his rhetoric, and such hustlers turned moguls as Jay-Z. Miranda says, by the second chapter, I was like, I know this guy. Just the hustle and ambition it took to get him off the island. This is a guy who wrote his way out of circumstances from the get-go. This is part and parcel with the hip-hop narrative. Writing your way out of your circumstances. Writing the future you want to see for yourself. This is a guy who wrote at 14, I wish there was a war. It doesn't get more hip-hop than that. End quote. Like, what? This is like what Miranda says. And so he's Tupac, but he's also Jay-Z. Like, how exactly, except in the most simplistic, glib way? Like, they all liked money and went from ranks to riches and wrote things. That's it. But note what else is on the list of 20 influences from the New York Magazine article. The West Wing. It's also in the title of the piece. They prominently mention it in the title. And he says of it, West Wing was huge. Like Hamilton, it pulls back the curtain on how decision-making happens at the highest level, or at least how you hope it would be. The amount of information Aaron Sorkin packs into a scene gave me this courage to trust the audience to keep up. End quote. And to add to the evidence, there's another piece titled A Brief History of Lin-Manuel Miranda's West Wing Obsession. It appears in Decider.com. This is an excerpt. If Miranda weren't primarily defined by his prolific talents, he'd certainly be defined by his boundless enthusiasm for his own projects, for musical theater as a whole, and in one particular case, for the fictional Bartlett White House in the West Wing. Note hip-hop wasn't mentioned. He's such a fan that when he took his bows after his final performance in the role of Alexander Hamilton on July 9th, they played the West Wing theme music for him. They didn't refer, end quote. So think about this. They didn't refer to anything black, African, from the South Bronx, hip-hop, Latino, feminist as his final, all-time definitive send-off from the show, as the final punctuation at the end of his era as the lead, likely to be considered his show's peak era. He chose West Wing as the ultimate encapsulation, punctuation, embodiment of the musical's ethos. So the article continues. As far back as 2011, Miranda was up on his Twitter fantasy casting a West Wing musical. This West Wing obsession became so widely known that when the Hamilton cast was invited to the White House earlier this year, the cast staged a Sorkin-esque or Tommy Schlemesque, to more accurately credit the West Wing's longtime director's walk and talk scene, complete with rapid-fire dialogue adapted to the Hamilton story, of course. And I put the video in the show notes. In addition to the Hamilton tribute video where he has the actors acting out Hamilton's West Wing style, he also even recorded a Hamilton tribute rap to West Wing. And it was called What's Next, which is one of the major catchphrases of the West Wing show that appears a lot.
What's next?
Did you get the popcorn? The filibuster is in. I'm Toby Ziegler with the drop. And what kind of day has it been? Miss Lynn spitting the truth, Agent Butterfield level detail on this track while you got that Black Mirror Wayne retail. Well, you can find me in Tommy Slimy behind me with the steady cam. I'm ready, damn, it's landing in. Remind me why I'm 5 votes down, always ready for my closer. The cops pull me over, fully sober, judgment doser.
What's next? What's next? What's next? So I'm saying, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? So I'm saying, what's next? Sir, when I ask what's next, it means I'm ready to move on to other things. So, what's next?
Yo, ma, your body, your work's inspiring. Yo, ma, your child is a siren.
He's seriously talking about Yo Ma. But I mean, he's not being ironic, man. This is real. Okay, that's enough of that. All right. That's enough of that. It's painful. I can't take it anymore. All right. So if you see his West Wing related tweets and interviews and West Wing related lyrics, his knowledge of West Wing lore and history is deep. I mean, he's much more convincing as a West Wing superfan than a hip hop one. And it makes sense because West Wing liberalism is where his passion really is. Like that's where it really lies. It's like way more than hip hop. And we've already seen the only reading and expert consulting he got regarding the history involved in the Hamilton era is from the Founders Chic School of History. His only expert was a Founders Chic author that was on set consulting. So you can see that this musical is not only a love letter to West Wing liberalism, but also to Founders Chic, but definitely not hip hop. The article, clearly written by a fellow West Wing liberal and fan of the show, ends with the following paragraph. Quote, "The beauty of Miranda's West Wing fandom isn't just he likes what I like, though he does, he likes what I like. Rather, it's the deep affection he has for the show that informs so much of his own artistry. The utter lack of cynicism, for one thing. The arms wide open embrace of a piece of art, for another. The West Wing is a fantasy of America at its best, and if you've seen or listened to Hamilton, it's not hard to see why that might have an appeal to an artist like Lin-Manuel Miranda. So she gets it. She knows who it's for and what it's about and what it's channeling. What comparative homages has he done to people of color and black culture, especially hip-hop? Has he shown anywhere near as deep and obscure and obsessive a knowledge about hip-hop as West Wing? No, he just touches on the banal and the obvious. Has he done a rap song paying tribute to the obscure greats of rap history or similar tributes to black history or other non-white histories? No, because either his depth of knowledge of them is not that much deeper than that of a West Wing liberal, or it is deeper, but he doesn't want to do such things because his target audience is West Wing liberals and he wants to keep them comfortable at all costs. Chris Jackson, who plays George Washington, in a Vanity Fair interview, also calls himself a West Wing superfan and calls the show the shorthand between him, Miranda, and Cale, the director. So yes, they're all so steeped in West Wing lore that they speak to each other in West Wing code. Like, that's their shorthand. The interview notes that Jackson sounds as starstruck by Bradley Whitford, who we mentioned before, who starred in the West Wing, as he was by meeting Obama, the president. So the actor playing George Washington is clearly as giddy about the West Wing as Miranda is, as is the director. So again, this is not a reach. Since West Wing and Founders Chic are the biggest influences on Hamilton the musical, before really delving into Hamilton's content and its politics, we need to get a clearer understanding of the West Wing and its politics and its fans. And later, we'll examine Founders Chic in more detail also, because it comes from a similar mindset as West Wing liberalism. There's a lot of overlap with it, and Hamilton counts as Founders Chic. So, I have literally only watched The West Wing for the first time 3 weeks ago. And I have to say, after binging on it about 30 episodes in 2 weeks, it's like if you want to understand better white liberals, I mean, this show is the master key. Like, so many things became clearer. A lot of things I didn't understand about liberals after watching The West Wing, it just was clear as a bell. But there's 4 articles that really capture how influential the West Wing still is on the modern white liberal imagination. And they're in the show notes, but there's four articles that really capture it. Like, Beyond Josh Lyman Politics, How the West Wing Educated My Political Generation by Pete Davis. There is no better encapsulation of contemporary white liberalism than the West Wing. That's a Bad Thing by Michael Darer, Darer. How Liberals Fell in Love with the West Wing by Luke Savage. And an episode of Chapel Trap House podcast, episode 101, Aaron Dorkchin. West Wing epitomizes the self-aggrandizing impotence of the mainstream of white liberalism. Like, its refusal to actually listen to or make room for anything but a few token non-white voices, all while claiming to empower said voices. Its utter inability to see itself as anything but the moral high ground and the last word in righteousness. Like, West Wing showcases how white mainstream liberalism is not so much a bold crusade for real social justice, but it's just like an article in the show notes says, a when it's convenient road trip toward the moral high ground that is often wholly unaware of what it's ultimately illustrating. West Wing is what liberalism was trying to reinvent itself as at that time in history. West Wing liberalism was a response to Bush Republicans and the claim that liberals were too wimpy to do what, quote, needed to be done in terms of kicking ass abroad and that liberals were too unpatriotic. It was white liberals as they wanted, as they needed to see themselves, like patriotic, believing in America as fundamentally good, believing in its institutions, being as willing to bomb black and brown countries as Republicans, but for the so-called right reasons. West Wing was also how they wanted to see Republicans and America's history and America's institutions. All three as ultimately good. In the 30 or so episodes I saw, every black person, with the exception of maybe one, when they appeared, was there to be a magical Negro. Like, they were always there to use their inherent common sense and homespun wisdom to help teach one of the white protagonists important lessons and act like the Jiminy Cricket, on that white protagonist's shoulder. Like, it got so comical when I was watching the first season. Like, every black person who appeared with a speaking role, I would just wait for them to bestow some sage homespun wisdom on one of the white protagonists, and it never failed to happen. Sometimes, like, they'd scold the white guy. Sometimes they would tell a grandfatherly type of story, but they would always be there to help show the goodness of white liberals and how they're always trying to grow and get it right. One episode was even named after one of the magical Negroes that appeared in it. The title of the episode was Mr. Willis of Ohio. That episode's the best showcase I've seen so far of the West Wing magical Negro, although they appear throughout the first two seasons. Later on in real life, you can see why Obama was a wet dream for white liberals, because he was two things common to the West Wing in one person. Being biracial, he was white enough to be seen as a real-life West Wing white liberal come to life, a real-life Jed Bartlett, who was the president in West Wing, the fictional one, and at the same time, black enough to be a magical Negro for real-life West Wing liberals to fantasize about using to show how progressive they were as well. So that's why white liberals love pointing to the love of Obama as proof of how racist they weren't. And there was a throwaway line from Bradley Whitford to that effect in the movie Get Out as well. And Hamilton, the musical, takes it further by literally transforming white historical figures into magical Negroes and West Wing type liberals that modern white liberals can use to feel good about themselves and their forefathers, even as the show centers their historical white voices over historical black voices, all the while using black actors, black slang, black music to do it. I want to mention now another aspect of mainstream white liberalism that the West Wing perfectly captured. And for this, I'll quote from the HuffPo piece I mentioned earlier. So this is the passage. The other fundamentally white component of Sorkin's vision here is this unflinching faith in America, its people, its institutions, its capacity to fight the evils that breach the surface from time to time. Even though the West Wing is willing to address these evils with a fair amount of candor, its seeming certainty that such things do not and should not irreparably damage our love of country is a deeply white perspective, and one that media in general has failed to honestly contend with in the last year. The notion that racism and misogyny, homophobia and xenophobia and transphobia, hatred of Muslims and Jews, and the disabled are bugs in the system and not features, which is to say that they were unintentional side effects, not ideas inherent to the code of this country, is one that white liberalism has failed to shake. Instead, it appears again and again under new and different qualifiers. That these ideas are simply not American, that patriotism involves holding one's country to a higher standard. There is little mainstream entertainment of the idea that ongoing conception of America is dishonest and structurally corrupt, that this country has not yet earned the love of a large portion of its citizenry, and that they should not be expected to give the nation or its institutions the benefit of the doubt. You can see it throughout politics, as Democrats profess love of country just as effusively as Republicans, and white liberals employ respectability politics as casually as conservatives, as they criticize people of color who dare question the institutions of the country, as opposed to simply question the ugly ideas with which these institutions are shot through, and which they continually empower. This sudden defensiveness is deeply tied to Sorkin's refusal to indulge the idea that America is not fundamentally decent. It informs the knee-jerk criticism of anyone who implies that America is racist, as opposed to that racists are racist and their population density in the land of the free and the home of the brave is startlingly coincidental. It's not difficult to understand this reaction. To entertain the notion that America is elementally racist is to suggest that Americans might be as well, which is to put oneself in proximity to racism in such a way that muddles the notion of the liberal as one of the good white people, who would absolutely never, ever engage in or tolerate that malarkey. It's hard to be the great white hope when you got dirt under your fingernails. Unfortunately, for the fantasy of the great white hope, it's also hard not to have dirty hands when you're playing in dirt. So, West Wing liberalism is for the type of liberal who says shit like, dissent is the highest form of patriotism. Like, watch Hamilton the musical and you can see the same described values on display there. In the real world, especially among younger generations, this unflinching belief in America and its institutions' inherent goodness has been in serious decline. Sorkin himself has realized this in the years since West Wing has gone off the air, and it pisses him off. I mean, listen to this clip from his later show, The Newsroom. It has the same romanticism about America's past and its inherent goodness and defense of America's institutions and great white men of history. But whereas the West Wing was optimistic and kind of assumed a sympathetic audience and was preaching to the choir and trying to make a positive case through Jed Bartlett, this time in the form of Will McAvoy, it's angry and defensive and blaming of others who no longer agree. Someone asks Will McAvoy, what makes America great? And the answer starts off surprisingly radical and subversive. Like, he angrily rants about how America isn't great and goes in with stats on literacy, math, labor force, the size of the prison industrial complex, and defense spending. Then he pauses dramatically and then says the following.
Sure used to be. We stood up for what was right. We fought for moral reasons. We passed laws, struck down laws for moral reasons. We waged wars on poverty, not poor people. We sacrificed. We cared about our neighbors. We put our money where our mouths were, and we never beat our chest. We built great big things,
like
made ungodly technological advances, explored the universe, cured diseases, and we cultivated the world's greatest artists and the world's greatest economy.
Wow. Yes.
We reached for the stars.
Oh my God. Yes.
Acted like men. We aspired to intelligence. We didn't belittle it. It didn't make us feel inferior.
Yes.
We didn't identify ourselves by who we voted for in the last election, and we didn't scare so easy. We were able to be all these things and do all these things because we were informed by great men, men who were revered.
Men who beat their slaves.
First step in solving any problem is recognizing there is one. America is not the greatest country in the world anymore.
Oh, God.
Enough?
So, after what seems like a promising start, I mean, after a speech that at first seems pretty progressive, if not radical on the surface, like, holy fuck, does it go off the rails? I mean, wow, what the fuck, yo? It's that second half of the speech. It could come from Sean Hannity or Bill O'Reilly. It's an example of what was it's a perfect example of founder chic. As we can see in this clip, it's very in line with Sorkin style liberalism. Like, it's not only compatible with it, it's an indispensable part of it. The beauty of Hamilton, which is just as much an example of founder chic and a belief in historic American exceptionalism as that newsroom speech through and through, is that it does it in disguised form, in the Trojan horse of representational diversity optics. And it gets away with it in a way that newsroom can't. Obama was supposed to be the realization of this Sorkin worldview, a real-life Bartlett administration come to life. And at first it seemed to work. Obama, at his best, redeemed the Sorkin West Wing vision by presenting it with a black face and voice. Like, just by coming out of his mouth, West Wing liberalism automatically came with an air of representational diversity and magical Negro lessons thrown in. Even some things that would be laughable or insulting coming from a white male, even a liberal one, were okay coming from a black person, like some of Obama's lectures to Black America. And Hamilton took the same principle and took it further by projecting it into the past and even recasting the old white faces of American history into Obamas. Like, Hamilton is just a bunch of Obamas. The founders in Miranda's Hamilton are West Wing white liberals in non-white faces, just like Obama is a West Wing white liberal with a black face. And like Obama, Hamilton took things that would seem laughable or offensive coming from white people. In this case, imagine white actors and writers writing and performing Hamilton. And it got away with it by having non-white people do it. A white-fronted founder chic musical wouldn't have been nearly as popular and would be way more problematic. As an aside, one way you can tell Miranda is way too influenced by the West Wing here is how even the rap battles more resemble, in content and style, West Wing arguments than they do real-life rap battles from any era. One thing about Sorkin's dialogue, his banter, is that it's all text, no subtext. Like, everything is literal. Everything is surface. There's no guile, there's no cleverness, there's no nuance or reading between the lines or double meanings. Everyone just says what they mean. Nothing's ever left unspoken in his dialogue. It's didactic. No one's ever sarcastic without announcing they're being sarcastic. And everyone is always alternating between using arguments to dump a shitload of data on an opponent or to do inspirational speechifying. What I just described about Sorkin's dialogue and written debates, all of it applies to Miranda's dialogues and rap battles in Hamilton. It's just Sorkin-esque dialogue and banter and arguing, but set to rap. Obama and Hamilton made it safe to be an American apologist again, even for black people. Not only for the American present, but now even for American history going back to slave-owning times. And even better, it allowed black people to pretend they were being invited along for the ride. Black people were being told too, hey, you can also become part of the family and celebrate founder chic alongside us. Isn't that nice? It's the same spirit of that sentiment that the grandfather said in the promotional video in Get Out.
Maybe one day you'll enjoy being members of the family.
Because quiet is kept. Let's really be real. Hamilton allowed bougie black people the chance to see come to life on stage their most pressing, imperative, and all-consuming fantasy. The chance to be honorary white people, except with a little residual black swag for some added flavor. The need to keep that residual black swag, let's be honest, is less motivated out of some great love for other black people and more by a realization that certain aspects of their blackness keep white people in thrall and fascinate them. They love white validation, white fascination. They see the negrophilia some white people have and play up their blackness, mostly to play to that negrophilia. You see it in that bougie black people won't want to keep alive any aspects of the black experience or culture that white people find distasteful. They want to embody the best of both worlds fantasy. The both worlds being the ones I described in my first podcast episode and that the grandfather describes in Get Out. Also, if you want to see a great 15-minute video discussing negrophilia and the history of the concept, search YouTube for a video titled The Philosophy of Get Out, Wisecrack Edition. A white liberal can no longer get away with lecturing black people, on some personal individual responsibility bootstrap shit, but Obama can deliver that speech in their place. Hamilton fine-tunes the formula even better because now it has black people play literal white people espousing West Wing liberalism. That same personal responsibilities bootstraps lecture a white liberal can't patronizingly give to a black person, and that even Obama increasingly had trouble getting away with giving to black people, Hamilton gets away with. White liberals used to be able to get away with that in the days of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, but that's gone. But here's an example of Hamilton getting away with it.
How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by providence, impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar? The $10 founding father without a father got a lot farther by working a lot harder, by being a lot smarter, by being a self-starter. By 14, they placed him in charge of a trading charter.
And every day while slaves were being slaughtered and carted away across the waves, he struggled and kept his guard up. Inside he was longing for something to be a part of. The brother was ready to beg, steal, borrow, or barter.
In 2011, Obama told the Congressional Black Caucus in a speech, quote, "Take off your bedroom slippers, put on your marching shoes, shake it off, stop complaining, stop grumbling, stop crying." He also said, "I don't have time to feel sorry for myself. I don't have time to complain." But the thing is, as time went on, even Obama was having trouble getting away with preaching white-centered neoliberal values like the bootstraps myth to black people. You started seeing more articles like in the Washington Post in 2013, one titled, "To Critics, Obama's scolding tone with black audiences is getting old." And a professor in that article even said, Obama's speeches are actually not aimed at black people. They're actually for white people, liberals especially. It's the legacy of Daniel Patrick Moynihan and that whole group of white liberals who want to say it's not just about structural problems, that black people aren't doing well. It's about their own values, end quote. Another similar article appeared in 2003 in The Nation by Ora Bogado titled, "The First Couple's Post-Racial Bootstraps Myth. Michelle and Barack Obama's troubling advice to black graduates includes some seriously worn-out stereotypes." During his Morehouse address, Obama warned students against blaming the system for keeping black men down and said, "There's no longer any room for excuses, and nobody's going to give you anything that you have not earned." As if they were asking for something they haven't earned. You know, they're just graduating and just want jobs. He got a lot of grief for that from a lot of people. Still not as much as if a Republican said it or a white liberal, but definitely more than he used to in the past. However, it appears if you just rap the same bootstraps myth, even if it's rapped badly, it's all good again.
I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. Hey, yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. I'ma get a scholarship to King's College. I probably shouldn't brag, but dag, I'm amazed and astonished. The problem is I got a lot of brains, but no polish. I gotta holler just to be heard with every word I drop knowledge. I'm a diamond in the rough, a shining piece of coal, trying to reach my goal. My power of speech, unimpeachable. Only 19, but my mind is older. These New York City streets get colder. I shoulder every burden, every disadvantage I've learned to manage. I don't have a gun to brandish. I walk these streets famished. The plan is to fan this spark into a flame. But damn, it's getting dark, so let me spell out the name.
Just like Obama and his personal responsibility bootstrap speeches, and how they were downplaying the role of the system and of discrimination and keeping black people from just succeeding through personal individual responsibility and bootstraps. Hamilton's raps do the same historically by ignoring the role, the system of slavery, the structure of colonial society, and the reality of class and racial discrimination played in keeping people down back then also. Just look at the murderer's row of so-called quote-unquote sane Republicans who love Hamilton. A lot of that comes about because of the individual personal responsibility bootstraps narrative that it preaches throughout. I mean, it's shot through with it. And the fact it has minorities and immigrants preaching it, the exact people that Republicans love preaching it to the most, is like the icing on the cake. It must be orgasmic to see. There are other reasons Republicans like it, but that's a major one. But conservatives especially, of the highbrow elite variety, love Hamilton. Mike Pence attended. Mitt Romney saw it. The Bush twins. The conservative website Twitchy had a bunch of tweets from disgusting but articulate, verified blue-check TCOT media types defending and going gaga for it. Some of whom even support and retweet white nationalists on their Twitter timelines. Multiple people from National Review, the Federalist even praised it, going as far as to defend the musical from criticisms from more radical, non-founder chic historians in a piece called Hamilton Haters Are Why We Can't Have Nice Things. The piece was written by David Marcus. This is an esteemed conservative writer behind such wonderful takes at the Federalist as, let me get ready for this, Why White Privilege is Not the Problem, Kevin Williamson is Not a Bigot, In Defense of Old Racist Art. He also did a piece defending the death of Mike Brown in Ferguson. He had a piece titled, Of Course Atticus Finch Was a Racist, and That's Okay. Donald Trump is the GOP's Black Lives Matter. How Our Culture of Narcissism Creates Trans Obsessions. South Dakota Stands Up to the Transgender Mafia. Ted Cruz is right about policing Muslim neighborhoods. How anti-white rhetoric is fueling white nationalists. He did an anti-Muhammad Ali piece painting him as a dangerous radical not to be admired, titled, Who Whitewashed Muhammad Ali? And in the same piece, he takes a shot at Martin Luther King for good measure. A piece titled, Dear MTV, Telling White Guys What to Do Just Provokes Racism. Ending federal funds will be the best thing for the arts in decades. Rupert Murdoch, who has tweets of a ton of racist things in the past, tweeted, quote, Fabulous show, musical of Alexander Hamilton, great acting, dancing, singing, historically accurate with lives of Washington, Jefferson, etc., end quote. BuzzFeed not only points out, but celebrates that David Brooks, Dick Cheney, and Peggy Noonan are fans. New York Times and TheHill.com also praise its appeal among conservatives as a good thing rather than a cause to question the player's progressive, so-called anti-racist credentials. In the Hill.com piece, the following passage appears, and it's so West Wing. President Obama on Monday heaped praise on the cast of the hit Broadway musical Hamilton, saying it's brought together an unlikely cross-section of Americans. It has become a favorite in the Obama household, Obama said at a White House event with cast members and musicians. In fact, Hamilton, I'm pretty sure, is the only thing that Dick Cheney and I agree on. And that's not necessarily true, by the way. As Alex Nichols points out in a current affairs article, other points of agreement include drone strikes, Guantanamo, the NSA, and mass deportation, but I digress. TheHill.com continues, Obama joked he could use some of the show's good vibes in working with members of Congress whose support he needs to confirm his Supreme Court nominee. This show brings unlikely folks together, the president said. Turning to the show's creator, Lin-Manuel Miranda, he asked, If you have any ideas about a show about Congress, for example, now's your chance. We could use the help. It's real life imitating the West Wing. It's totally a scene out of the Bartlett administration. That whole idea that anything that brings both sides together must be doing good. This is the same Sorkin-esque worldview, getting along with and happily working alongside good, sane Republicans in the name of enlightened debate and spirited discourse is a sign that a liberal is doing something right, not a reason to be horrified about what your values have become. John McWhorter is somehow a vocal defender of this play and defends it against critics, even though he's usually critical of anything anti-racist that can be deemed to have forced diversity agendas. Also, a narrative that resonates with many white right-wingers today, especially those with an Obama paranoia and Trump fetish, is one of white men forming small militias in order to wage a revolution against the powers that be. Militias like the one led by the Bundy brothers that took over the federal building in Oregon. Hamilton valorizes the Revolution of 1776, which was basically a group of young white men banding together to form a militia to fight for freedom against tyranny. That's the narrative. These themes still resonate with many white conservatives today. West Wing liberalism and compassionate, quote-unquote, sane conservatism, both of them are ultimately neoliberal and as a result end up having a lot in common. If you need a better idea of what neoliberalism is, I have links in the show notes. Hamilton is ultimately neoliberalism or West Wing liberalism in black and brown face. That's why West Wing liberals and neoconservatives and sane Republicans are able to agree it's great. Beltway liberals and conservatives coming together to love it is an example of the same type of bipartisanship West Wing loves. Except this time, they're coming together to consume propaganda rather than pass bills. To a West Wing liberal, the fact that a Beltway polite Republican agrees with you on something is a sign you're doing something right, not a sign to be horrified about what you may be doing wrong. I just saw a season 2 West Wing episode where the liberal Bartlett administration hires a hardcore Republican lawyer named Ainsley Hayes, and this is supposed to be a sign of how enlightened the Bartlett administration is, that they hired this person who believes in the opposite of all their political stances, just because it serves the concept of elevated, high-minded discourse and healthy debate. So, to further understand all this celebrating over how respectable Republicans are loving this play alongside mainstream liberals, and why that's being treated as a good thing, let's consider these passages from Luke Savage in his Current Affairs West Wing piece. What follows is a fetishization of elevated discourse, regardless of its actual outcomes or conclusions. The greatest political victories involve semantically dismantling an opponent's argument or exposing its hypocrisy, usually by way of some grand rhetorical gesture. Categories like left and right become less significant, provided that the competing interlocutors are deemed respectably smart and practice the designated etiquette. The discourse becomes a category of its own to be protected and nourished by serious people conversing respectfully while shutting down the stupid with heavy-handed moral sanctimony. There is no such thing as a moderate Republican in real life, only a polite one. The upright and genial Paul Ryan, whom President Bartlett would have loved on the show, is on a lifelong quest to dismantle every part of America's feeble social safety net. Thus, Bartlett Democrats do not see Republicans as the enemy, except to the extent that they are rude or insufficiently respectful of the rules of political decorum. If your values are procedural, based more on the manner in which people conduct themselves, rather than the consequences they actually bring about, it's easy to chuckle along with a hard-right conservative, as long as they are personally charming. This fantasy idea of sane Republicans, right, who ultimately want the same things as Democrats, that Savage is discussing in that passage, you can see it in Hillary's 2016 alt-right Pepe speech, and the hilariously wrong takes many liberal journalists had of it after it was done. Hillary wasted a good one-third of the speech appealing to so-called good Republicans, those never Trumpers. One was George W. Bush, as well as other neoconservatives and sane Republicans. And W couldn't even bring himself to vote for her. The best he could do is leave the president slot blank on his voting ballot. I mean, this is despite all the lavish praise Hillary heaped upon him as one of the good ones, and the fact that the man she was running against was an authoritarian nutjob who totally disrespected his brother Jeb and made a national laughingstock of him, made him into someone so laughable he could never be taken seriously in politics again. But after the speech, this is what Michelle Goldberg at Slate, this is what her take on it was. The headline was, Hillary Clinton's alt-right speech isolated and destroyed Donald Trump. Yep, and the article made Hillary sound like a super genius Machiavelli who succeeded in appealing to all these good Republicans who at the end of the day would surely be guided by conscience and the desire to achieve a greater good that would make them reject Trump. Oops, like we know how that turned out. And now that Trump won, they're just trying to use this moment in time to push through every type of ghoulish bill that they can. So when you read this article, yeah, sure, it sounds crazy, both at the time it came out, but especially in hindsight today. But after having suffered through 2 seasons of The West Wing in 2 weeks, I get this impulse now. Like, if Jed Bartlett gave that alt-right speech Hillary did, but in an episode of The West Wing, it would have worked. Like, we'd probably have a scene where the sane, fictional Republicans are all sitting at a table with Trump, skeptical but ready to deal with him, and then the Hillary Pepe speech airs, and you would see them just shocked at hearing all this information, and they'd probably rise from the table one by one and declare, Mr. Trump, I think we're done here. I may be a Republican, but first and foremost, I'm an American. And what you're describing doesn't sound like the America I've been fighting my whole life to defend. Good day, Mr. Trump. Like, I think that's what Goldberg was thinking was going to happen. Like, the West Wing affects a lot of people's minds. And does the Paul Ryan Hillary described in the speech and that Goldberg references in the article sound anything like the ghoul who just further gutted American healthcare a few weeks ago, despite doing so in a well-spoken, polite way? Some of the other reasons why I think many conservatives like Hamilton, besides what I mentioned, is it gives them the joy of seeing black people use their own native art forms to pay homage to the white Republicans' racist ancestors and their oppressive institutions, instead of seeing them use said art forms, like rap, which they usually hate, to do criticisms of America and its history and its institutions as being fundamentally racist, which is what the old rap used to do, like Public Enemy and stuff, but Boogie Down Productions. Like, seeing black people endorse America and its racist white forefathers instead of criticize them has to feel like a win for a group of people who want blacks to stop protesting, stop complaining, assimilate, and adopt white mainstream values, especially white conservative ones. If you have racial superiority complexes, whether it's the more overt racism of the Republicans or the more covert patronizing racism of some liberals, there must be some perverse joy in seeing historically oppressed people sing and dance in a good old Negro way with a smile on their face to cosplay as and celebrate their biggest oppressors, slave traders. It's as close as they'll ever get to seeing black people thank white people for putting them in slavery and taking them out of that backwards primitive old Africa, which is a popular racist fantasy. I mean, isn't that what this basically is, Hamilton? Like, it's black people thanking white people for bringing them here and giving them a chance to take part in this grand noble experiment. I mean, it's a woke minstrel show. Let's be real. West Wing aired from 1999 to 2006, and a lot changed in America in that time as far as blind faith in America and its institutions go. Like, take the high esteem a show like The Wire gained when it aired from 2002 to 2008 in overlapping and later years. It's nothing but white people failing as saviors of black people, inequality being structured as a feature of the system and not a bug, of bootstraps and personal individual responsibility narratives being exposed as lies, and systems and bureaucracies portrayed as inherently flawed and broken. Liberals and Republicans both came off badly. The Wire overlapped with The West Wing and lasted 2 years after it ended. But it shows how outdated the ideals of The West Wing were becoming even before it fully went off the air. And with it, Founders Chic declined too, not coincidentally. Like in 2003, the historian H.W. Brands in The Atlantic declared that Founders Chic, which had been experiencing renewed interest from 97 to 2002, was now experiencing a backlash and a decline. This too was only 3 years before The West Wing went off the air, and 2 years into The Wire. I know The Wire was never a ratings juggernaut, but I'm just trying to show a change in the general sentiment, like a sea change. Anyway, Brand in his article lists a bunch of books from 1997 to 2002 that epitomized the peak of the Founders Chic trend. And 3 of those books listed were cited by Lin-Manuel Miranda as his only nonfiction sources for Hamilton. Hamilton is, as I said before, the modern pinnacle of Founders Chic. It made it cool again for our current Obama so-called post-racial era. And one of those 3 Founders Chic authors that Brands mentioned in his Atlantic piece, Ron Chernow, he's also the only historical consultant on the musical. And all the authors are white men. So it's only the input of white, mainstream-minded men, no black historians, no radical historians. So if Hamilton has a white-wing, mainstream neoliberal agenda, a Founders Chic agenda, and is made for the type of white audience that is enthralled by Aaron Sorkin, both on the left and the right, why exactly do so many middle-class black people seem to enjoy it and think it's about their needs and that they're the primary audience? To get that, you need to understand bourgeois black liberals, especially the kind who work in prestige media. Black liberalism is too often just white liberalism with a little bit of performative swag. It's black people who don't want to overhaul and fight the system, don't want to rebel against West Wing white liberalism or neoliberalism, but just want validation from the system, regardless of how rotten it is. They just want to be represented in the system, even if only in the form of superficial optics and bullshit privileges, and not in the form of real power, real capital, real say. Diversity and representation culture today is too often just making sure your culture is represented regardless of what the collective standard of living for people in your culture currently is. A corporate boardroom of a Fortune 500 company that's exploiting the black community in the US and exploiting black and brown and yellow countries worldwide. And to the diversity, take that, right? To the diversity representation matters crowd, the biggest social concern in that scenario is making sure that that corporate boardroom has black, brown, and yellow faces on that board, helping to do that exploiting and plundering. And I may actually be giving them too much credit. I think the old guard of diversity matters representation crowd might have cared about the boardroom and its racial makeup, but I think the new millennial social justice version of the diversity crowd, I think they wouldn't even care if those exploitative companies kept their boardrooms 100% white, so long as they had a mix of brown, black, yellow, and female actors in the commercials. Like, not only are optics all that matters to much of this crowd, but the level of optics needed to pacify them has become increasingly superficial. This same idea of only caring about a seat at the table, but not caring if it's a shitty table, enacting shitty policies, extends to politics too. Like, take the Obama administration in Haiti. This is from a Business Insider article. It started when Haiti passed the law 2 years ago, raising its minimum wage to 61 cents an hour. According to an embassy cable, this infuriated American corporations like Hanes and Levi Strauss that pay Haitians slave wages to sew their clothes. They said they would only fork over a 7-cent an hour increase, and they got the State Department involved. The U.S. ambassador put pressure on Haiti's president, who duly carved out a $3 a day minimum wage for textile companies. The U.S. minimum wage, which itself is very low, works out to $58 a day. Haiti has about 25,000 garment workers. If you paid each of them $2 a day more, it would cost their employers $50,000 per working day, or about $12.5 million a year. As of last year, Hanes had 3,200 Haitians making t-shirts for it. Paying each of them $2 a day more would cost it about $1.6 million a year. Hanes Brands Incorporated, though, made $211 million on $4.3 billion in sales last year. But thanks to U.S. intervention, the minimum was raised to only 31 cents. So basically, Obama helped an American corporation exploit a poor black nation and keep its working poor under its boot. But when you point this out to many black liberals, which I've done, they seriously tell me things like, well, what do you want? He's just doing what every president has done. Why are you giving him special scrutiny? All the white presidents do it. Which begs the question, like, what's the point of having him there, of having a black president in general, if he's not supposed to treat us any better than the white politicians do? And that's because in their mind, symbolism is enough. Symbolic victories, optics, providing a carrot on a stick to help their own black kids continue their own bourgeois striving, that's all that matters. Same as when Obama took $400,000 for Wall Street speeches. It's okay because white presidents before him have done it too. He's not there to change the system or develop new values. He's there to just repeat the white values, but in a black face. Kind of like what Hamilton does with history. Keep the old regressive values of founder chic alive. Just give black people the quote-unquote honor of being the face of it, of getting representation, of getting a seat at the shitty table. As long as no culture is subjected to overt incivility or rudeness, as long as races and cultures and genders are superficially respected, even if via lip service and superficial optics, nothing else really matters. It's okay if inequality increases so long as the increasingly successful haves have the same racial breakdown percentages as the have-nots in the general population. Hamilton takes this diversity-first mindset and projects it into history. Suddenly it's okay to make a story lionizing slaveholding, colonizing, genocidal, elite white men, so long as those elite slaveholding white men are made to resemble people of color and women, and the traditional oppressors now get made to look and sound more like the traditionally oppressed. It's a mindset that's totally assimilationist and conformist. It's not at all oppositional or desiring to change the system or the structural racism that creates inequality and oppression and disenfranchisement in the first place. It just slaps black and brown paint on the white faces that created the system in the first place and whose descendants and race still benefit from that system. Like, becoming more quote-unquote progressive means improving in respect to gay rights, race, gender, feminism, but in ways that don't actually challenge inequality and don't right past wrongs via redistributing wealth, power, ownership, or significantly restructuring society in any way at all. That is, bourgeois liberal anti-racism or bourgeois liberal feminism or any other bourgeois liberal form of a progressive cause never involves risking taking away rich liberals' money, power, influence, or status, or removing them and their values from the center of any narrative. It's like how the public face of the gay rights struggle now is the bourgeois one. Like, there's less talk about issues like high suicide and runaway rates among gay teens or any other gay issues except for whether or not they can get to have wedding registries. that lifestyle liberalism. Not that that doesn't matter also, but it's become the only gay issue we hear about. Walter Ben Michaels, in an article, Let Them Eat Diversity, once said, quote, "You know you live in a world that loves neoliberalism when having some people of color who are rich is supposed to count as good news for all the people of color who are poor. The argument for Obama is he's there, so I can be there too," end quote. And it's true. Like, compare that to the utterly ridiculous backpatting the social media slacktivists and blue check bougie black media Twitter was doing to themselves for that ridiculous Oscars So White campaign, which was just about helping black millionaires get shiny trophies from white millionaires, and acting like it was some great victory for black people everywhere, including the ones struggling every day in the streets. Meanwhile, the black masses are still poor, still getting gentrified out of neighborhoods, still getting shot like dogs in the street, and white cops still can't get convicted, no matter how much evidence exists and how much protesting happens. But some rich black folk got Oscars. There's a black token in the new Star Wars movie. He gets his ass kicked all the time, but he's there. Rihanna got a Vogue cover. Representation matters, y'all. Like, black liberal public intellectuals exist to be a moral voice for white elites. That's why they spend more time telling white allies how to perform allyship better and check their privilege than telling black people how to organize real black politics that involve redistributing capital. They also exist to cheerlead black assimilationist striving. As we see with their obsession with validation from white elites and their institutions, it really is an obsession. Like, similarly, letting black and brown people play the ancestors and icons of elite whites feels like a huge piece of validation from whites. So, of course, black and brown liberals are going to love it. Hamilton works because it's the ultimate marriage of the West Wing white neoliberals' worldview to the diversity representation matters black liberals' worldview, which is basically the same as the West Wing liberals' worldview anyway, just with some United Colors of Benetton optics added on top. And as an aside, a great article about black public intellectuals. I think the gold standard is Adolph Reed's What Are the Drums Saying Booker, which is going to be in the show notes. But definitely read that after listening to this. But make no mistake, the West Wing white liberal is the primary concern through and through. Just like the white people at the Garden Party and Get Out are the primary beneficiaries of the transplant process in the movie, winning over the coffee creamers, and that's what I call the black public intellectuals, because their purpose is to make blackness less harsh and easier to ingest and digest for white intellectuals. Winning over the coffee creamers is just a bonus. The approval of black bougie liberals and their endorsement just gives it a little extra cultural capital. It's like the frosting on the top of the cake. It allows the white liberal to enjoy it a little more guilt-free, but the black liberals are mostly an afterthought in this process. Remember what was said in Get Out. The process works a little better if the black vessel goes along with it. That's why everyone who attends Hamilton points out that there are hardly any black people in the audience and that there are more black people on the stage. Those tickets aren't priced for the average black person. They're priced in a way that keeps most black people, even the middle class ones, from being able to go. They're not chasing the black dollar or the black eyeballs here. The show is literally about white people. The rapping is whitewashed. The history is whitewashed. The target audience is white. The black people are just the medium, the mediating force that makes the farce all okay for these white people to enjoy. This isn't for black people and their self-esteem. It's for white people and their self-esteem. White people don't have heroes anymore. I repeat, they don't have heroes anymore. And think about it. Like, they feel political correctness has robbed them of heroes they can feel proud of, real life heroes. Because Their heroes, the real life ones, are always getting exposed as racist, sexist, genocidal, or otherwise problematic. This has struck a blow to the white collective self-esteem and something of a backlash, part of which we've seen in Trump's election, and this talk against political correctness has taken place in the general culture. You also see it in all the white genocide talk that the alt-right does. But make no mistake, many white liberals also suffer from this loss of white heroes and also have taken a blow to their collective self-esteem. They, as much as white conservatives, needed their collective self-esteem restored by having their white heroes restored. And Hamilton does this. It does them this solid of doing that for them through the labor of non-white people and the implicit non-white moral endorsement that said non-white labor brings with it. If you look at how white people are more obsessed with fictional heroes than ever today, like when they discuss politics, they're always talking about superheroes, Harry Potter, Hunger Games, etc., as the lens and a model for politics. That comes from that loss of white heroes who aren't problematic. Hamilton lets white people reclaim these dying white heroes and extend their legacy by using black bodies. This double bargain of Hamilton is the same one the grandfather pitches in the promotional video Chris has shown when strapped in the video in Get Out.
With your natural gifts and our determination, we could both be part of something greater, something perfect.
So, black people get an honorable, intellectually enlightened lineage that they supposedly lacked by inhabiting the roles of white founders, and white ancestors and heroes are able to reacquire souls, empathy, sexiness by inhabiting the bodies and voices of the black actors who are seen as having an authenticity that white people no longer have. Again, think back to my first podcast episode where I discuss what black people embody to white people. The black people give them a soul and allow these white founders to connect to modern audiences, while people of color, especially the middle-class strivers and immigrant people of color, get to feel the illusion of inclusion with bourgeois white people, something which is always a chief goal of the middle-class, non-white diversity crowd. Hamilton makes magical Negroes into the symbolic medium, the artistic midwife, through which to make the founding fathers palatable. Like I said, look at the Grammys and who wins them nowadays. It's white people channeling black people. Look at Adele, Eminem, Timberlake, all the white people who win and who white people are emotionally connecting with the most are white people who are communicating with so-called black voices. White people don't trust their own voices to either garner or convey empathy or to be sympathetic. There is a reason black music is called soul music, because many white people believe they themselves are all brain and no heart, no soul. And it's not only emotionally relatable, but also sexy. Hamilton is sexy as well, despite the corny music, just by the presence of it, the beautiful black coordinated bodies. Like, it's almost sexy in spite of itself, because the music is written very unsexily, but the way the non-white bodies are showcased, lots of exposure of muscular arms, suggestive gyrations, attention grabbing perky asses, like modern day hot and tot asses to be gawked at while you enjoy your white supremacy apologism. You know, it is a sexy show. It's also why the king is the only character portrayed by a white guy and sings in the whitest style. If blackness gives a soul, gives sexiness, moral superiority, the ability to emotionally connect, authenticity, what better way to make the British people the opposite of that? Unsympathetic, unsexy, inauthentic, morally inferior, than to make the one Brit character devoid of any blackness at all. If anything, he's a caricature of whiteness. He's hyper white. He's corny, unhip. His musical style is dated and stiff compared to the rap, even though, let's be honest, the rap in this is corny, unhip, dated, and stiff itself, but it's still much hipper and blacker in contrast to the King's music. The King is unsexy, a clumsy fop. His whiteness is played up to highlight the contrast to the blackified American founding fathers. If blackness is used in service of American whites, lack of blackness is used in this service to the British whites. The Americans of the musical that we see on stage are better people because they have all the ingenuity and rationality white people are associated with all the authenticity and emotion and sexiness that black people are associated with.
With your natural gifts and our determination, we could both be part of something greater, something perfect.
This is another reason why a quote from David Diggs, who plays Thomas Jefferson, is wrong. He says in an interview, "Rap is the voice of the people of our generation and of people of color, and just the fact that it exists in this piece and is not commented upon gives us a sense of ownership." Let's be real, the rap is not there to give you a sense of ownership. It's there to give the white founding fathers, and by extension, the white audience who wants to see their ancestors redeemed, it's there to give them a sense of humanity and likability, not to give you a sense of ownership. Like, nowadays, even in founder chic, it's not cool to praise Thomas Jefferson too much. He's supposed to be the one founding father that even conservatives admit is okay to portray kind of badly. And Hamilton does go that route too, because in typical liberal of color fashion, it goes after white people that white people say it's okay to go after. So Hamilton does go the route of critiquing Jefferson too, because white people commonly critique Jefferson now. And even then, it's hard to really see Jefferson as the racist monster he is when you have him oozing with black charisma, depicted as a mix between Cab Calloway and Morris Day in Purple Rain attire with hip-hop swag. It imbues Jefferson with so much black charisma, swagger, and black dandyism in the form of his crushed purple velvet attire that you end up loving him in spite of yourself. This is a man who raped a 14-year-old slave and likely impregnated her many times over her lifetime until he died. So, okay, what if it's not really for black people, you might be saying? Like, so what if it's not for them or about them after all? You might say, what's the big deal to you? Like, why should that stop black people from enjoying it and identifying with it? I mean, after all, there are non-white West Wing fans out there. Not all West Wing liberals are white. You may be asking, why not just let black liberals enjoy this as West Wing or Sorkin fans, if not as hip-hop fans? And I think the problem is that the musical, I'd be okay with that if it wasn't using black people for the benefit of rehabilitating the images of white people, and on top of that, outright insulting black people and their history and ancestors in the process. It's a huge insult. The problem is people are used to thinking of black people as less than human. And even other black people internalize this. It's part of living in America. You internalize it to a degree. So things that you can clearly see as offensive when not involving black people suddenly get harder to notice once black people are involved. These people were slavers of black people, or at the very least all enabled or indirectly profited from or turned a blind eye to the slavery of black people. Why are we supposed to encourage black people to feel a connection to them? Why is it considered an honor for black people to play the people who shipped their ancestors across oceans, killed millions of them, enslaved millions of them, for what ended up being hundreds of years and multiple generations? Why are we supposed to lament that black kids can't identify and connect with these people? Why are we supposed to view it as a problem that black people, especially children, aren't worshiping their historic oppressors as heroes and buying into founder chic propaganda? What other race would anyone expect this from, besides black people? Here are some hypothetical questions. If Hamilton was a pure white production done in stereotypically white music and dancing, how would people view his founder chic hero worship? Wouldn't it be considered problematic, censoring of elite white men, whitewashing history, Eurocentric propaganda, erasing of non-white narratives, all the things that make the Will McAvoy speech praising America and its history and ethics in that newsroom speech from earlier feel icky. So why does black people delivering the same messages, even using hip-hop, negate that ickiness in any way? If anything, it should amplify the ickiness. Would Jewish people acting out a pro-Nazi Holocaust denial musical be great because it gave Jewish actors a job and a chance to feel a connection to the Nazi story? Would it be considered great that now Jewish children can feel a connection to Hitler and Goebbels and understand them better as well-rounded people? Like, hey, Hitler was a failed painter. How do you feel? How do you feel about that, Jewish kids? Can't you relate? Like as Ishmael Reed pointed out, can you imagine Jewish actors in Berlin's theaters taking roles of Goering, Goebbels, Eichmann, Hitler? And going back to the be able to be a part of the story excuse, imagine someone writing a Holocaust-denying or Holocaust-minimizing version of World War II, then telling Jewish people, hey, this gives Jewish people a chance to feel like part of the World War II story. There was this whole World War II thing going on, and Jewish people don't get to feel like they have any part of that story because they have nothing to do with it. So let's have them play the roles of the Nazis in this Nazi apologism. Now they can feel a connection to the Nazi story. Now, I assume the most ridiculous part of that argument jumps out at you. The Jews were a part of the World War II story. They weren't casually being left out of the best parts of the Nazi regime because someone really left them off some HR department diversity memo. They were actively being dehumanized, oppressed, captured, subjugated, raped, murdered, put to forced labor, starved, and massacred. They were actively escaping for their lives or imprisoned, waiting for death and praying for freedom. There was a Holocaust going on. Likewise, the same logic applies to black people. Black people were not left out of a chance to be a part of the fun parts of the founding of America. They were there. They were mostly the slaves and undergoing their own Holocaust. Black people were in America in significant numbers at the time of Hamilton. Hamilton just refuses to show them and barely mentions them except in passing because it's inconvenient to making the white West Wing liberals and the quote-unquote good Fox News Republicans the show was actually made for feel good about themselves and their ancestors. Many black people weren't just the field labor and the household help back then. Black slaves fought in the Revolutionary Army, and one slave named Cato was a spy alongside his owner, Hercules Mulligan, also a spy. Hercules Mulligan, a white man, gets to be a character in Hamilton, but Cato, an actual black man who assisted him in his spying duties, doesn't. So how is Hamilton helping black people become a part of the story if it's leaving the real black people out? Cato bravely helped Mulligan's spying efforts, but the show cuts Cato out of the narrative completely and instead just has a black guy play his white owner and pretend the white men did all the accomplishments alone. How does that give a black person ownership of the history when you erase the existence of a black contributor? Do Black Lives Matter or not? However, we're supposed to ignore this erasure of Cato and be happy because you give a black actor the quote-unquote privilege of playing the white slave owner. This is fake inclusion. This is the illusion of inclusion. You erase all the real black voices, pretend they didn't exist or matter, elevate the white ones, and ignore almost all of their faults. Then the black people whose ancestors were erased by you then allow them to cosplay as their oppressors and then act like they should be grateful because they quote-unquote got jobs. History didn't need diversifying because it was already diverse. Black people didn't need to be retroactively inserted into the narrative because they were already part of the narrative. And you and your founder chic bullshit is what erased them from the narrative to begin with. I mean, more of this insanity can be seen in a review by Michael Paulson of the New York Times, which says this musical, quote, looks like America now, in contrast to then, which makes no sense because the play is all minorities except for literally one guy. America is not today a country where the population is almost 100% black and brown and yellow people. So tell me how the Hamilton stage looks like America now. America is almost 80% white. An all-white production actually looks more like America now than the Hamilton stage composition does, with all its minorities. The other part is there were minorities and immigrants back then, including black people. New York at the time was already like 14% black. If you accurately included the real black people of the era as characters and then had actors of the correct races play all of them, that end result would actually recreate what America looks like now far more than making all the people minorities would. Why are people acting like this play takes a real scenario that was originally all white and makes it diverse? This has never been a white nation. This is a two-pronged lie. First, you erase the genuine diversity that existed in the era, so now you make it seem like a white story. You turn it into a white history. That's the first lie. Then you paint faces brown and make them walk and talk with black swagger and pretend that you now have a production of diverse viewpoints and narratives that is now, quote-unquote, everybody's story, which it isn't. No amount of casting of people of color will change that you erased real people of color from the actual narrative and are now telling white history, a white story. That's the second lie. Daveed Diggs, who played Thomas Jefferson, said, quote, "I walked out of the show with a sense of ownership over American history. Part of it is seeing brown bodies play these people," end quote. These people, meaning slave-owning white people, play acting as white slave traders, makes you feel a sense of ownership over American history? Why? And is that healthy? Daveed Diggs also said that being in the show and seeing a black man play George Washington has changed his relationship to the country. He feels patriotic for the first time in his life. Other cast members feel the same.
Maybe one day you'll enjoy being members of the family.
So my question is, why is this good? Why should we judge a play's value by how proud it makes an oppressed people of the people who oppress them the most, and patriotic to the country that was founded on oppressing them? The fact the play accomplishes the feat of making black people patriotic to a country that is still killing them without repercussions or consequences, because this is being recorded just 2 weeks after Terrence Crutcher's killer, the cop Betty Shelby, got off for murdering him in cold blood. The fact that it's making them feel patriotic to a country that has that going on is a strike against it in my book. And ironically, a lot of these people will be the same people saying that they're proud of Colin Kaepernick for not pledging allegiance to the flag. So, like historian Lyra Montero said, quote, "It is problematic to have black and brown actors stand in for the great white men of the early United States in a play that does not acknowledge that the ancestors of these same actors were excluded from the freedoms for which the founders fought," end quote. This is like the old doll test where they showed black kids a white doll and a black doll and asked them which they preferred. And they all felt that the white doll was beautiful and the black doll was ugly. And they all preferred to play with the white doll. Except this time, the black people today are looking at historical figures, white and black, and finding the white figures to be beautiful and preferable, and the black historical figures to be ugly and in need of being shoved out of sight. Ron Chernow, the man who wrote the book the musical was based on and who was the sole expert used for it, used this excuse also when defending himself against critics. He claimed that casting black and brown people effectively wrote non-white people into the story. This is beyond insulting. As an author of a history book that largely helped to minimize the plight of the non-white people in the era, he played a big role in taking non-white people out of the story in the first place. Now he wants props for putting them back in a fucked up way. He's like a guy who steals your car, takes it for a joyride and crashes it, then tries to sell it back to you in a fucked up state and expects you to be grateful. Chernow also characterized the debate as sad because Hamilton is the best advertisement for racial diversity in Broadway history, his exact words. So not the work of Lorraine Hansberry, George C. Wolfe, or August Wilson. Dreamgirls, the musical Fela, Pearly Victorious, Your Arms Are Too Short to Box with God, which had 3 successful Broadway runs, Rent, Lion King, Alvin Ailey, not to mention many Latino and Asian Broadway productions that have appeared created by Latino and Asian people. This guy is arrogant enough to think his Founder Chic in blackface show invented diversity in Broadway. He thinks he's Christopher Columbus discovering diversity on Broadway. It's nuts. Chernow then took it one step further and claimed that the historians criticizing him, many of whom were people of color, including the black female historian most responsible for uncovering the truth about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, the one who made it okay for people to criticize Thomas Jefferson as a rapist. He called those non-white and female historians the real racists. Yes, he pulled the "you're the real racist" card on non-white critics. This is who liberals and black people are caping for. So picture this for any other race. Picture a musical about the era and region of the Armenian genocide, but you really want to be inclusive of Armenian oppressed voices. So your answer to this is to erase all real-life references to Armenians from the narrative, hire their modern-day descendants to play singing and dancing Turks, but they're singing and dancing in the Armenian style, and then say you're doing it so that they can, quote, feel like part of the story. And then make sure the whole affair is as flattering to the genocidal Turks as possible and never actually mention there even was an Armenian genocide. Then tell the Armenians they should be grateful for the jobs, and then write tons of glowing press for what a step forward it is for the Armenians to be doing this. Like, compare this to how Native Americans received a show that was supposed to make Andrew Jackson, mass murderer of Native Americans, as well as a slaveholder himself, into a sexy, cheeky rock star in a fun theater production. It was called, like, Bloody Andrew Jackson or something. A Native American playwright named Rihanna Yazzie helped organize a protest of it, and in an open letter declared it left her, this is a quote, assaulted, manipulated, and devastatingly used as a means to a weak and codependent end, end quote. And she was saying that participating in it as a Native American, she felt was weak and codependent of her. And how many black people praising Hamilton have you seen realize that it's kind of weak and codependent to be so in love with this show? But racially it is. And Yazzie's letter also says, quote, there is nothing about this history that is all sexy pants, to quote the marketing machine that accompanied this show. The truth is that Andrew Jackson was not a rock star, and his campaign against tribal people, known so briefly in American history textbooks as the Indian Removal Act, is not a farcical backdrop to some emotive, brooding celebrity. Can you imagine a show wherein Hitler was portrayed as a justified sexy rock star? This play exacerbates the already deficient knowledge our country has when it comes to Native history. In that context, a false story about this country and our engagement with Native American people is unforgivable, end quote. And I say good for her. I wish we had more black people with the common sense of these Native American activists who protested this show and kept it from being as successful as it could have been. I mean, maybe they're as easily bought off as we are. I don't know. Maybe if Bloody Andrew Jackson was the same but used Native actors and other minorities in all the roles and just ignored the atrocities against the natives completely, maybe they'd have loved it the same way black people, despite so few of us actually being able to get in to see it, have embraced Hamilton. But somehow I doubt it. That being said, check out one black activist's great article bashing the show, Ishmael Reed's article, Hamilton the Musical. Black actors dress up like slave traders, and it's not Halloween. Great article, and I wish there were more like it. More thought experiments. What if Hamilton was a piece of founder chic and it had white actors performing that mix of that Eminem Lose Yourself style mixed with the corny nerdcore style of rap? You know, basically the Hamilton style of rap. How would that look at white people as the founders rapping and gesticulating like black people? How do you think that would go over? For example, if you look at one of the most popular segments of The West Wing, which looks totally cringeworthy and racist viewed through today's lens, something called The Jackal. I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes. Or you can just Google West Wing The Jackal on YouTube and you'll find it. All these white characters gather to watch a white woman pantomime and lip sync a black hepcat type style musical jazz performance. It's hard to explain if you haven't seen it, but search on YouTube for West Wing Jackal. It's absolutely cringeworthy today, by today's standards. All these white characters on the show are entranced by seeing this white woman channel black coolness. And one character, played by Rob Lowe, even starts doing a mock hip-hop gesticulation with his hands. If you search YouTube, you'll see it better than I can describe it, and it's worth watching, and it'll also be in the show notes. West Wing fans still wax nostalgically about the Jackal, including Lin-Manuel Miranda, who has tweeted his love for the Jackal. That routine. But we all know it could never pass muster today. Social justice warriors would have their heads. But what if you could have a black person act out the Jackal? I mean, that's a good workaround, right? Have a black person act like a white person's parody version of a black person. And ladies and gentlemen, I present Hamilton. There are some problems using Ron Chernow and his book as a source material in The Soul Consultant, besides just the fact he subscribes to Founder Chic. Chernow is not even a real academic historian. He's a talented author who likes to write history books, and they're, I'm told, very engaging and entertaining, but he's not academically trained as a historian. That leads to some sloppy mistakes. Andrew Shockett, an actual history professor, describes some of them in an article. It goes as follows. Alexander Hamilton, Chernow's book that the Hamilton the musical is based on, is far from definitive on the Federalist Papers' most prolific contributor. Chernow deeply mined Hamilton's writing, but barely scratched the surface of the prodigious scholarship on the founding era's politics and culture, and it shows. The resulting close focus fails to give readers a sense of Hamilton's broader meaning in his time and place. Worse, it enabled Chernow to indulge his own instinct to go to great lengths to lead or defend Hamilton's mistakes, excesses, and questionable actions in ways that a broader knowledge of the period might have tempered, better serving readers in history. Chernow failed to report on Hamilton's subtle encouragement of a military coup, seemed not to notice Hamilton's extremely disdainful view of democracy, and vehemently denied, despite Hamilton's own assertions, that Hamilton's financial program was specifically geared toward the wealthy. Chernow also exaggerated Hamilton's abolitionism, arguing with little basis that his staunch abolitionism formed an integral part of his economic vision, and greatly oversold Hamilton's abolitionist activities. For example, strangely touting that in 1788, amid Hamilton's whirlwind of activity, he stepped up his involvement in the Manumission Society, a commitment that even Chernow admits consisted of attending a single meeting. That's the end of the quote. So there's a lot of history, Chernow's book and Miranda's musical, due to being based on Chernow's book, either downplay or get wrong. But we'll get to that later. Another thought experiment. What if Hamilton helped sell and own white people? Could it work as entertainment? It couldn't, because black people aren't human and white people are in the white imagination. On Twitter, someone said to me, this is a quote, "Working in historic tourism is a super tough needle to thread, getting young girls and POC to sympathize with founders despite vast differences." End quote. And I've heard black people say similar things. I don't want to isolate and pick on this one person who tweeted on me, because I've seen many people say things like this, including black people who are part of a bougie black media Twitter. And my question is, why is it so important to people that people of color sympathize with founders? Like I said before, would anyone, again, ask groups of oppressed white people to do this to their historical tormentors ever? Why do people only expect this of black people? Why do black people so often expect this of themselves? Why? Would someone take Jewish kids on concentration camp tours or tours of Nazi landmarks and find it unsettling that they couldn't relate with the Nazis? Consider this. In October 2015, Rockefeller Foundation announced a partnership with the Hamilton creators, the New York City Department of Education, and the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History, with the goal of sending 20,000 public school kids to see Hamilton and integrate the show into classroom studies. This educational initiative was made possible through a $1.46 million grant by the Rockefeller Foundation to Gilder Lehrman. The announcement stated, quote, "The Rockefeller Foundation recognizes Hamilton as the groundbreaking work of genius, and everyone should have the opportunity to see it, regardless of their resources. This is doubly true of students who are finding their passions and deciding their career paths," said Judith Rodin, president of the Rockefeller Foundation. Works like this don't come around very often, and when they do, we must make every effort to maximize their reach. We are making a small down payment toward inspiring the next generation of historians, artists, singers, and musicians, and it's one that fits squarely within our goal of expanding opportunities to achieve positive impact, end quote. Now, in June 2016, the first leg of this program was such a success, they expanded it by an additional $6 million and 100,000 extra public school students in additional cities. So now that's a total of almost 7.5 million dedicated to this project, and 120 public school kids total being subjected to founder chic hagiography. This isn't something they're doing for black people. These kids are supposedly mostly black and Hispanic. These kids don't need this. Let's be real. This is social engineering with all the problems black children have and tangible quality of life improving solutions they need. This is a priority? It's doubtful. Plus, do we really need a generation of kids from the inner city where real rap was born at a tender young age, getting brainwashed into thinking nerdcore Hamilton-style rap is good? Hasn't rap quality suffered enough decline? But seriously though, first off, it's propaganda. Would they send these kids to a musical showing horrors of slavery that might make these kids grow up woke enough into the type of adults who realize black Americans have a claim to make on America's capital in the form of slavery reparations? Second, this is a West Wing liberals' idea of what helps a black kid, which is teaching black kids to be more like them and live out their values. To them, these kids are a bunch of Charlies. Charlie Young being the black character in the West Wing who starts off rough around the edges and unpolished, and from hardship and in need of white mentorship and a white savior, and who by the end of the show is basically a West Wing white liberal in blackface. His transformation over the course of the show being finally complete. He's totally assimilated and absorbed into the milieu. Charlie is a West Wing liberal's idea of the most help you can give a black person. Turn them into a junior version of you and make them absorb your values and assimilate. Programs like this Rockefeller Hamilton one are Charlie making endeavors on a grand social policy scale, playing to the Pygmalion My Fair Lady fantasies West Wing liberals types have with promising black and brown kids. Were there vanity projects? And again, see the allegories and similarities in Get Out. One thing many apologists try to tell me about Hamilton is, it's just a musical. It's not meant to be taken seriously as history. It's obviously fictionalized and fake. You're taking it too seriously. And to that, I say two things. First, even if it was fictional and everyone watching took that into account, so what? Some of the best propaganda and cultural brainwashing took place in works that were clearly acknowledged as fiction. Fiction can influence generations of minds and spur incredible social change. Everyone knew Uncle Tom's Cabin was fictional, but it's considered to have been a great propaganda piece for abolitionists that greatly helped their cause and changed public perceptions of slavery. Even in this episode, this podcast, we discuss lasting effects that the West Wing TV series has had on modern Beltway Democrat politics and informing how white liberals see themselves and their role in the political process. And that's clearly fictional too. People are clearly treating Hamilton as documentary in fact, not just as fiction, whether it's the creators themselves, the media, or educators. The quotes from the people involved in the aforementioned Rockefeller Foundation program clearly think it's a valuable history teaching tool and explicitly say so. PBS NewsHour said the show gives students, quote, a lesson in life and art and a better understanding of Alexander's accomplishments and place in history. Lin-Manuel Miranda himself said not every student who comes to see the show is going to have a life in the theater, but they are going to have to reckon with how much Hamilton got done in his life. And this is going to spark a little bit of, well, what am I going to do with my life? It's more personal responsibility, bootstraps talk, neoliberal. Miranda also said, 6 years before the play opened, he always thought, quote, whenever I finish this play, it will be useful for teachers. So you can't have it both ways. You can't praise it for being a good teaching tool worth dumping millions of grant money into and incorporating into public school lesson plans. And then when it gets criticized for being inaccurate, say, it's just fiction as a defense. It doesn't work that way. So if people, including educators, are treating this like a teaching tool and saying it's going to teach children accurate history about who Hamilton was, the next question to ask is, okay, who was Hamilton and how does he compare to who the musical says Hamilton was, since the musical is presenting itself as a teaching tool? Miranda's Hamilton is recast as a really cool, scrappy, talented immigrant born out of wedlock in the Caribbean who comes to America to find money and fame. He's a Horatio Alger-esque immigrant striver, American dream bootstraps propaganda piece. He's like, with this lionization of the quote-unquote good immigrant, you can see why the likes of Mike Pence liked and wanted to see it. Hamilton's idealized version of immigrants really isn't that different than what Trump described his ideal immigrant as being.
The $10 founding father without a father got a lot farther by working a lot harder, by being a lot smarter, by being a self-starter. By 14, they placed him in charge of a trading charter.
It's all about hard work. If you work hard, you'll make it. By implication, if you don't make it, it must be your fault. You didn't work hard enough. In that case, who cares about organizing, about collective action, about the role of government in righting wrongs and helping you get a fair shot? It's all about the individual. Your revolution is an individual one, an atomized one about individuals striving and letting markets work and believing the system is inherently structured to give everyone a fair shot if left to its own devices. So things like systemic oppression, structural racism, predatory capitalism, housing policies, discriminatory immigration practices that allowed some immigrant groups to assimilate and leapfrog over American black slave descendants and less favored immigrants of color. Forget about all that. This distinction is something you see in the logic of immigration policies on the right, like Trump's wall, and on the left, like Obama's exceptional dreamers. It's basically neoliberalism. It's a neoliberal wet dream, which is why centrists both on the left and the right can love it so. A great message for black middle-class assimilation strivers who are the people the mainstream civil rights movements and diversity initiatives have always benefited the most anyway, at the expense of the black masses. That's why they're the black people who cape for this show the hardest. By manipulatively recasting Hamilton in a way that allows the black and Hispanic children, many of whom are from broken families also, and whose families also came here as scrappy strivers, many of whom are the same type of kids who will be the New York public school students sent to see the musical by the Rockefeller Foundation. Kids who have been raised by those parents to be individualistic strivers and make their name and money in America, it reinforces in them a really shitty neoliberal politics, but it does so dishonestly to boot because Hamilton isn't even really an immigrant. And we'll get into that later. Hamilton is Obama and everything he represents in musical propaganda form as described in a Counterpunch article by Paul Street. And the passage is as follows. Obama no doubt identifies strongly with Miranda's Hamilton, the product of a broken family and a foreign father he barely knew. The president fancies himself a shining example of what a highly talented, hardworking outsider can accomplish if they apply themselves and their skills so as not to blow their shot at success in the supposed great American land of opportunity that the holy founders purportedly bequeathed to us with their glorious free market system. Obama has given black high school and college graduates and other minority audiences stern Booker T. Washingtonian bootstraps lectures on hard work and the promise of upward mobility on numerous occasions, citing himself as an example that anything is possible for dutiful toilers. He has also aligned himself in the public mind with immigrants, posing as the friend of dreamers who want to, quote-unquote, play by the rules of American striving. Never mind the special backing he's helped the federal government give to the already opulent financial elites who crashed the U.S. and global economy, only to emerge yet more obscenely and parasitically wealthy than before the Great Recession, thanks to the Hamiltonian support absurdly granted them by the likes of George W. Bush, Hank Paulson, Barack Obama, Ben Bernanke, Larry Summers, and Timothy Geithner, etc. Never mind that Booker T. Obama's success always depended on his service to the wealthy white and parasitic few, his leading backers, or the record number of immigrants the deporter-in-chief has expelled from the country. Miranda's Hamilton is in this sense a perfect cultural wrap-up to the ugly neoliberal Obama years. It is a brilliant ahistorical monument to Orwellian fake progressive bourgeois identity politics in service to the very predominantly Caucasian financial elite and ruling class hegemony. Now, first off, as I myself mentioned before, Hamilton wasn't an immigrant. At least not in the way we think of immigrants today. He was a subject of the UK. He was born in a British colony in the Caribbean and moved to another British colony, America. He was not the subject of one sovereign nation who then moved to another sovereign nation. He was not considered a true foreigner. He was considered of low birth for being poor and a bastard and possibly slightly mixed race. But he was not considered a true foreigner, at least not in the way modern immigrants are. And the show dishonestly tries to paint him as an immigrant to create a false connection between him and modern immigrants, particularly modern immigrants of color, because there's just one more way to validate the founders. Another person presented as an immigrant, Lafayette, also wasn't an immigrant. He was a French guy who just came here to fight in the war and then went home to France. So all that immigrants would get the job done is just pandering bullshit. Not only wasn't Hamilton a real immigrant, but he wasn't a fan of true immigrants at all. He ultimately endorsed the Alien and Sedition Acts, making it harder for immigrants to become citizens and allowing them to be deported if they were suspected of disloyalty. He did make exceptions for rich, elite merchant immigrants who weren't troublemakers. You know, he sympathized with rich and elites and gave them special treatment. And that's a common theme in his life. Whether native or immigrant or whatever, if you're rich and elite, he gave you special treatment. And while he did work hard and was extremely smart, his real big break was marrying into the rich and influential slave owner Schuyler family. So his story wasn't as bootstrapped and self-made as the show pretends either. Hamilton the musical, with its individual hard work is what matters neoliberal message, points out how many of the Federalist Papers Hamilton wrote in order to argue with how prolific and hardworking he was. You know, they want to, sell that work hard and you succeed narrative. So they focus on the sheer number of what he did and how much he wrote when it came to the Federalist Papers, as shown in the following clip.
Alexander joins forces with James Madison and John Jay to write a series of essays defending the new United States Constitution entitled the Federalist Papers. The plan was to write a total of 25 essays, the work divided evenly among the three men. In the end, they wrote 85 essays in the span of 6 months. John Jay got sick after writing 5. James Madison wrote 29. Hamilton wrote the other 51. How do you write like you're running out of time? Write day and night like you're running out of time. Every day you fight like you're running out of time. Like you're running out of time. Are you running out of time? How do you write like tomorrow won't arrive? How do you write like you need it to survive? How do you write every second you're alive? Every second you're alive. Every second you're alive.
Americans love a hard work ethic, more of that bootstrap striver talk. But notice how they don't actually tell you what was in the Federalist Papers, which include all those terrible stances I just described. This is because, like its inspiration, The West Wing, Hamilton doesn't really care so much about deep politics or articulating grand visions or deeply thought out ideologies, just superficial postures of moral superiority, minute battles and skirmishes, myths of hard work and meritocracy and being smarter than your enemies in elevated discourse and winning battles against them by being the most important part of politics, along with the wheeling and dealing, the forging and breaking of strategic alliances and the melodrama that comes along with that. That's what West Wing prioritizes about politics. So that's what Hamilton prioritizes about politics: the melodrama, the allegiances, the skirmishes, all that stuff. So let's go over what his Federalist Papers actually said, instead of just marveling at how prolific he was at writing them, like the Hamilton musical wants you to. Even in Chernow's book, he shows Hamilton was a social climber and status chaser who wanted to be an elite, and once he became one, always sided with them. When the economy was in trouble and indebted farmers were struggling, Hamilton feared that defaulting debtors would fake poverty and ruin their creditors. For months, he had vivid visions of the have-nots rising up and dispossessing the haves. He thought men who owned property were going to be held hostage by armies of the indebted and unemployed. He told a peer that the solution was that people like him, who were primarily concerned with the security of property, must make sure to put into government men whose principles were not concerned with economic fairness, redistribution, or helping the poor. He was basically an advocate of the 1%. In the Federalist Papers, he argued common folk weren't capable, morally or intellectually, of serving in Congress, and that the proper people to represent the masses in government were the small class of rich merchant capitalist elites, that political representation should be all landowners, merchants, and members of the learned professions. He agreed all men were created equal, but in shades of the book Animal Farm, he also said that the superior qualities and skills of the rich elites made them quote-unquote more equal than the other classes. He also said that the lower classes, including artisans' personal habits and lifestyles, were so lowbrow and ignorant that they were too dumb to fully participate in politics. He was a true snob. He also believed in growing the country geographically because a physically bigger company makes it harder for the poor and non-property owners to ever discover the strength in numbers and learn to band together to act in unison against the elites, who Hamilton viewed as their proper masters. He felt a huge country would help repress any future populist uprising. This is explicit in Federalist number 9, who is very anti-egalitarian. Does this sound anything like the bootstraps believing cheerleader for the underdog presented in Hamilton the Musical? In Federalist number 28, he talks about the need for a strong national standing army in order to suppress domestic rebellions. He believed the ruling classes needed an army to discipline the 99% through shooting, hanging, maiming, and jailing if necessary. He believed the presidency and the Senate should only go to the rich and well-born and should come with life terms because the elites deserve it and the non-elites were too stupid and of low character. He was very anti-democratic. This aversion to delving into deeper, overarching political values and visionary programs of its characters is another weakness Hamilton the Musical shares with the West Wing. And I think that probably comes from Lin-Manuel Miranda's rabid fandom of Sorkin. West Wing is light on grand vision and deep political philosophy. They have some postures on some cultural issues, but never express any grand visions for how to tackle the deep, foundational, and structural societal public problems and inequalities of our time. Instead, it was all about doing rhetorical takedowns, memorizing and reciting facts, showing the other side that your politics were better somehow because you memorized more facts and figures, recited them more effortlessly, and did it with much more gusto and confidence. Another thing West Wing considers more important than expressing a grand vision and core values through which you plan to address deeper structural problem is the internal dramas and changing allegiances within the Beltway among the power players and the strivers underfoot. Whether someone's next move or next allegiance might give their team a win. Everything is wins, losses, points, and scorecards. And in Hamilton the Musical, Miranda does the same thing retroactively to Alexander Hamilton's era. Hamilton the man actually had a vision and solutions he created to deal with what he felt were the problems of his day. As I described, they were disgusting, elitist, anti-populist, undemocratic, and repressive visions and solutions, but he did have those visions and solutions. But because Miranda is only interested in reliving the West Wing, but via historical figures, all the substantive politics have to go in order to go into the personality clashes and the power players and the intellectual jousting, with the rhetorical battles being done in hip-hop form as rap battles. Hamilton the Musical has all the political wheeling and dealing, all the vapid moral high ground posturing, all the encyclopedic literacy of the political process and inspirational but substantively empty speech that you find on the West Wing or in an Obama or Hillary speech, but coming out the mouth of a founding father and set to a hip-hop beat. Being right by being competitive and winning interpersonal skirmishes in both Hamilton and the West Wing is more important than being morally good and achieving a greater good for one's community. And similarly, it's also the most important thing to a public intellectual who subscribes to neoliberalism, which is what most of our prestige media is nowadays. So let's go more into what Hamilton actually believed rather than continue to discuss the West Wingish aspects the musical concerns itself with, like who he was allied with and how well he won debates with mental superpowers. Hamilton the musical keeps trying to paint Hamilton the man as being more dedicated to anti-racism and anti-slavery than he actually was. But in real life, Hamilton chose social striving over fighting slavery. The times he did oppose slavery were more based on practical concerns, not moral ones. His main goal was to rise in society. His humble birth made befriending the right, wealthy, and influential people of utmost importance. Many upper-class Americans owned slaves, and whenever his high society aspirations clashed with any desire to free slaves, he always chose his ambitions. If the play is right about one thing, at least, it's Hamilton as a compulsive striver. He was part of the New York Anti-Slavery Society, but being anti-slavery wasn't central to his political vision. He married into a slave-holding family. He only went to one anti-slavery meeting. He bought and sold slaves on behalf of his in-laws and as part of his assignment in the Continental Army. How badly could slavery have really bothered him? One of the black actresses from Hamilton, Renee Elise Goldsberry, a beautiful sister, she plays one of the Schuyler sisters, part of the family Hamilton married into, the sister of Hamilton's wife, Eliza. Anyway, Goldsberry visited the Schuyler home and sang the praises of the Schuyler sisters, who were part of the slave-holding family that Hamilton married into. She declares that the Schuyler sisters were, quote, the Kardashians of 1780, superstars but with dignity and grace, end quote. However, they had 27 slaves to serve them, and that played a big role in why they were able to maintain dignity and grace. They had a built-in makeup and beauty team. Black women whose daily chores and need to attend to the sisters left them little time to preen themselves. As Ishmael Reed points out, she's probably not deliberately being callous and ignoring that the Schuyler sisters strived on the labor of enslaved women in order to be glamorous. She's probably just a product of the same school system most of us are, a school system that endows slave traders and Indian exterminators with the status of deities, an educational tradition of dishonest propaganda that Hamilton the musical is a part of, which is why they want to put it in schools. Speaking of the Schuylers, how gross is it to have women of color in a musical proclaiming how lucky they were to be alive during a time of chattel slavery? That's an actual lyric these women of color have to sing on stage.
Look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. Look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now.
Anyway, but moving on. Even Ron Chernow, the writer of Hamilton the musical's source material and the musical's only historical consultant, even he admits that Hamilton and his wife may have owned 2 household slaves and may have negotiated the sale of slaves on behalf of his in-laws. Chernow, however, says that Hamilton likely negotiated these sales, quote-unquote, reluctantly. But how does he know this? Like other founding fathers, Hamilton somehow found slavery as evil, yet could be occasionally okay with slave trading. As Ishmael Reed points out, if Hamilton negotiated the sale of white people, would an audience be paying $400 or $1,000 or more a ticket to see a musical celebrating his life? The myth of Hamilton as a staunch abolitionist is in the tradition of revisionist right-wing historians like Forrest MacDonald. Hamilton didn't own a plantation, but he wasn't an abolitionist either. He was someone who tried to stay on good terms with both sides and play the middle. You could check out the Wikipedia entry on Alexander and Hamilton and slavery to learn more. It's also in the show notes. He supported blacks enlisting in the army, but it wasn't proof of his egalitarian views. It was practicality. He needed them to win the Revolutionary War. He simply saw no other way to win without doing it, and he wrote John Jay saying so. To convince Southerners to let their slaves fight, He warned them that if they didn't let their slaves fight for America in the Revolutionary War, England would make their own plan to recruit those slaves for their own army, in which case the Southerners would lose their slave property anyway without getting any benefit from it. Hamilton also tried to get the British to return black slaves they took with them when evacuating America on grounds they were stealing American property, and stated that their refusal to return said slaves constituted violation of a treaty. Some revisionist right-wing historians claim Hamilton's humble birth and outsider status instilled in him a hatred of slavery, and that his childhood being surrounded by slavery made him sympathetic to black slaves and an enemy of the institution. No existing document supports such a claim. It's based only on secondary information. We have no information on Alexander Hamilton's attitude towards slavery while growing up in the Caribbean. And he worked on a slave ship, so it was his livelihood in his youth. The musical very subtly hints about him working on a slave ship in the first song and makes it sound like he was tortured and suffering over being surrounded by it, and feeling like it was an injustice at the time, but there's no historical evidence to back that up at all. Gerald Hord, in an accuracy.org article titled Hamilton, Captain of the 1%, says the following. In terms of Alexander Hamilton, the man, he migrated to the mainland from the Caribbean as the enslaved Africans became more rebellious. The elite whites could no longer control the situation, though the region had been considered the crown jewel of the British Empire in this hemisphere. His coming to what became the U.S. was actually an example of what we'd call white flight, end quote. Horn also points out that Britain was moving toward abolition. So in 1776, the slave owners, when they rebelled, that was a large part of the rebellion. One of the motivations for the American Revolution was rich white people worried about losing slavery after seeing the ways the winds were blowing politically in England regarding abolition. Because remember, they instituted abolition long before America. So why should black people want to connect to any of that? Slavery and oppression of black people is only mentioned for the purposes of showing how enlightened and awesome and egalitarian Hamilton is in this musical. Similar to how the black characters in To Kill a Mockingbird and A Time to Kill, or in a Magic Negro episode of The West Wing, are only props used to show how awesome the great white male protagonists of the story are. And even worse in this instance, because it turns out that awesome and egalitarian Hamilton isn't even real. So it's not even true. Remember, this is the same Alexander Hamilton who Lin-Manuel Miranda says reminds him of Tupac. God only knows how. Lin-Manuel Miranda made conscious and active efforts to avoid the topic of slavery as much as possible. It wasn't just passive, careless oversight and omission. He was quoted in an interview as saying, quote, "As for the question of slavery, which is the great original sin of this country, it's in the third line of the show. But it's this thing that keeps getting kicked down the field." Hamilton and Burr were part of the abolitionist movement, the New York Manumission Society. So they were actually very progressive, but there's only so much time you can spend on it when there's no end result to it, end quote. So basically, he avoids talking about slavery and oppression of black people because he can't give it a pat, happy ending. And for fear it might bum out the 95% white audience watching it. But this production that admits to omitting the plight of real black people during the era it covers in the name of, the comfort of white audiences, this is the same one we're supposed to praise for supposedly making black people part of the story. Miranda considered doing a whole slavery number but cut it from the show. The explanation in his words? There was a rap battle about slavery where it was Hamilton and Jefferson and Madison knocking it from all sides of the issue. Jefferson being like, "Hey, I wrote about this," and no one wanted to touch it. And Hamilton being very self-righteous, like, "You're having an affair with one of your slaves." And Madison hits him with, "You want to talk about affairs?" And in the end, no one does anything, which is what happened in real life. But we realized when we were bringing our show, we realized we were bringing our show to a halt on something that none of them really did enough on. End quote. So basically, when he realized that none of these people really did anything about slavery, the number about slavery became inconvenient. So basically, when taking a stand against slavery becomes inconvenient to his goals of making money and appealing to rich white people who would help him rise in status, he would choose not to. I guess in that way, Miranda really is like Hamilton. That pesky slavery thing would grind the fun show to a halt and stop him from getting richer and rising in status, so let's just leave that out. Also, that's not West Wingish to actually have real deep, nuanced political issues that can't just be solved by owning someone in debate. The debate in this case being rap battles, so forget it. Christopher Jackson, who plays George Washington, who was never even mentioned as owning slaves in the musical, says in a New York article that the show offers implicit commentary on the institution of slavery and its repercussions, end quote. He also added, quote, "The Broadway audience doesn't like to be preached to. By having a multicultural cast, it gives us, as actors of color, the chance to provide an additional context just by our presence on stage, filling these characters up," end quote. What does this mean? The Broadway audience doesn't like to be preached to. By Broadway audiences, he means white people, because why would black people feel preached to by a slavery discussion? After all, their ancestors weren't slave owners in revolutionary times, so how can you preach to them about slavery? Between Miranda admitting he didn't want to bum out the audiences because he couldn't give the slavery issue the closure of a happy ending, and Jackson admitting that they were concerned with preaching at white audiences, is just more proof that the intended audience whose feelings they're concerned with is white people, despite all the PR talking points about doing this to give black people quote-unquote ownership and quote-unquote connection to the story. And Jackson admits himself that the main purpose of the black actors is their presence on stage as vessels that share space with the characters, filling up the characters. You know, like how the black people in Get Out were sharing space with white people in their bodies and filling them up from the sunken place. Also, a quick side note, there was an article about the same actor, Chris Jackson, in Vanity Fair, and this one had a pretty long title, but I think it's pretty indicative of the same problems. It said, it was titled, "George Washington never mentioned slavery in Hamilton, but the actor who plays him does." And the subheading was, "Christopher Jackson had to reconcile playing a slave-owning founding father as a black man, but he still can't help geeking out over history." Again, I think that's insane that it's a good thing that he geeks out over history anyway, despite playing a slave owner, but, you know, I digress. So anyway, slavery is a bummer that Miranda can't slap a happy ending on to make the white audience feel good. Plus, in trying to write a song about it, he came up against the inconvenient truth that they all willfully tolerated or at least participated in it, which ruined the happy-go-lucky upbeat vibe he was trying to give the white audience. You know, dwelling on it would grind the fun to a halt. Plus, who wants to preach to white people? Even though this show is supposed to be about diversity and helping black people and making their values feel represented, you know. So, despite all that, black people, are you still naive and desperate for validation enough that you're still believing this show was remotely created with you in mind as either the subject or the audience? Are you grasping yet how low on the totem pole you are in the list of concerns, both emotional and financial here? You're just here to make the white people feel good about themselves and make them feel like the post-racial reality that Obama promised is still here. The only black character who appears is Sally Hemings, and is in passing without even a speaking line. And all she does is have a cute comic moment where she's grinning and skinning, and she's shaking her sexy ass for Hamilton, and it's played for laughs. Sorry, not for Hamilton. She's shaking her sexy ass for Jefferson, the guy who raped her in real life. Now, her shaking her ass for Jefferson is played for laughs. The relationship just looks cute and playful and harmless. This is an enslaved woman Jefferson likely raped and repeatedly impregnated from the age of 14. And sex with a slave, due to the inherent power imbalances, can never be consensual, whether the slave is adolescent or adult, but especially true when the slave is adolescent, as she is here. So if you're thinking that as a defense, don't go there. But we make a rape victim into a punchline and let ourselves be entertained by a presentation of the rapist slave owner as a scene-stealing soul brother. Now imagine if Jefferson raped a 14-year-old white girl that he kept as a slave from 14 years old until well into adulthood, impregnating her repeatedly all the way. Would they still bring that white girl as a character onto the stage to do a cheeky, sassy walk-on during a fun musical number where they playfully hint at their sexual relationship and she doesn't even get a speaking role? She just shakes her ass suggestively and smiles and leaves. The worst crime of this show is not just that it erases black people's role from history, that it erases black people's victimizations from history, that it makes important contributions strictly the realm of rich white men. None of that is new to America. Revisionist American history is as old as America. The worst crime, what's new about this, is that this makes black people complicit in these acts of whitewashing, erasure, and minimization in ways previously unheard of. These people are put in a position where for money, for a job, they're forced to sing and dance and silence their ancestors' contributions and pains in order to celebrate their oppressors and entertain their white descendants of today with feel-good pablum. Like no thanks. And I just want to end this with a passage from Alex Nichols' piece that I mentioned before, and that'll be in the show notes. But it goes as follows. The conservative liberal DC consensus on Hamilton makes perfect sense. The musical flatters both right and left sensibilities. Conservatives get to see their beloved founding fathers exonerated for their horrendous crimes, and liberals get to have nationalism packaged in a feel-good multicultural form. The more troubling questions about the country's origins are instantly vanished as an era built on racist forced labor is transformed into a colorful, culturally progressive, and politically unobjectionable extravaganza. As the director of the Hamilton Theater said, it has liberated a lot of people who might feel ambivalent about the American experiment to feel patriotic. Ambivalent here means being bothered by the country's collective idol worship of men who participated in the slave trade, one of the greatest crimes in human history. To be liberated from this means never having to think about it. In that respect, Hamilton probably is the musical of the Obama era, as the New Yorker called it. Contemporary progressivism has come to mean papering over material inequality with representational diversity. The president will continue to expand the national security state at the same rate as his predecessor, but at least he will be black. Predatory lending will drain the wealth from African American communities, but the board of Goldman Sachs will have several black members. Inequality will be rampant and worsening, but the 1% will at least, quote, look like America, end quote. The actual racial injustices of our time will continue unabated, but the power structure will be diversified so that nobody feels quite so bad about it. Hamilton is simply this tendency's cultural, historical equivalent. Instead of worrying ourselves about the brutal origins of the American state and the lasting economic effects of those early inequities, we can simply turn the founding fathers black and enjoy the show. And that's the end of the passage. So, this has been longer than the usual episodes are going to be, but I missed a couple of weeks, so just think of this as like 2 or 3 episodes in one, make up for those weeks I missed. And in closing, let me just say thanks for listening. If you made it this far, congratulations, I'm glad. But don't forget to go to patreon.com/champagne sharks and support the show if you enjoy what's going on. And I hope you come back when we start having co-hosts and guests. And take it easy. It's been real. Bye.